What's up guys, it's Paraly5er here, and welcome back to another Grounded video. With the release of the fully yoked edition of Grounded and the final content update, we're going all the way back to OG Grounded. That's right, I'm going to try and beat the very first version of Grounded that's ever released, including taking on the original Hedge Broodmother. We begin in the menus, which look basically the same other than the version number. I decided to play on medium as Woe on this version is basically a death sentence, and then picked Willow because she has always been the best character. As you can see, loading in used to be much quicker, and I make my way out of the kids case and begin collecting basic resources as always. I then headed to the resource analyzer and began analyzing, although there was a no skip option in this version, so this took significantly longer than normal. With my usual items analysed, I was able to make myself a pebblet axe. I then found the old might and nat combo lying on the ground, something which doesn't exist anymore, but did provide me with some easy resources early on. Speaking of easy resources, I then headed to the laser to take out the lawn mites. This, as always, was an easy task, and I noticed the parry sound used to be different also. Next, I made myself a pebblet hammer to allow me to break the quartzite in the cave, dropping much more shards than it does now. I pushed the button on the mysterious machine only to realise I'd forgotten to chop the grass. After doing this, I was able to activate the mysterious machine, unlocking the oak lab. Off to the oak tree now, where I began by breaking acorns and getting scammed as they dropped much fewer parts than in the current version, as well as no guarantee of a top. Once in the lab, I made sure to solve the puzzle, which I kinda missed, and then opened the door to see my first challenge, a Tay's tea. Luckily, I'm always up for a challenge, so was easily able to take it out, collecting 100 raw science upon looting him, and then heading deeper and reviving Burgle. I used the resource analyzer in the lab to analyze even more items, as I was desperate for recipes, particularly the acorn armor. I talked to Burgle and got the message saying that that was the end of the story for this version. I remember the first time I saw this when playing, I was shocked. We're 3 minutes into the video, and I've finished the story already. Well, don't worry, there's plenty more to do, starting with giving Burgle the first Burgle chip, which was lying on the ground next to his body. I then claimed my first quests and checked the science shop, but I was too poor to be able to afford anything.
You're poor. Interesting. Oh, you're broke. Yes, okay. He's broke. He's a brokey.
Before leaving, I made sure to hit Burgle, which brought up his health bar. I then made sure to empty it, but nothing happened. At least not yet, but this would be a big mistake later on. Regardless, I built my first workbench and checked the recipes to find I could afford nothing. I cut down a dandelion and then equipped it. This was the only trinket available at this point in the game, and I was going to need it, as there were no molars or mutations to help maintain the bone structure of my legs. Off to another field station now, as I had remembered that I needed to analyse planks and stems, getting me even more recipes. I was now able to craft my first armour, the acorn armour. This is my favourite tier 1 armour to this day, as it provides very high defence. I then realised that equipping armour keeps it in your inventory, meaning I'd have to waste even more slots just to carry armour. But it was fine, because I now had a chest to deposit items into, meaning I could clear some space in my inventory. However, shortly after doing this, I noticed the ants stealing my items, so I had to quickly take everything back again before it was all gone.
Hey. Stop! It's mine!
Time to complete our first Burgle quest now, getting only 100 raw science as a reward. And just like that, I could finally sleep for the first time and see that, hang on a minute, no cutscene either. God damn it. Time to head underwater now to grab some clay. This takes so much longer when you can't block cancel between attacks, but eventually I had enough to build a basic foundation for my base on top of the baseball. Now I know this is a very basic spot to build, but it's where I built my first ever base, so I decided to build here again for old time's sake. With that, I broke my chest from earlier, although sadly you only get half the resources back, so I lost some stuff. Thankfully, I still had enough resources to build a new chest on the baseball, allowing me to clear my inventory and preventing the ants from stealing anything. While exploring the yard, I managed to grab the rotten lava blade and took it to a field station for analysing, as I wanted to analyse all items in this playthrough. I was grabbing a bunch of mushrooms when I noticed a scabby on the ground, so picked it up, putting us one step closer to collecting them all. I decided to equip it as I don't often do this, and it would be nice to see some scabbies on the old version. Back to the science shop now, where I could finally afford my first purchase, which would of course be the multi-story bases, as I needed floors in my base. Another day, another burgle quest, this time building the marker in Spade Gulch, which also made me curious about the cave. Upon breaking the acorns, I remembered that there wasn't a cracked rock here in this version, so I was able to head inside. Within, I found 500 raw science along with a tape and some granola bars. I then headed home to rest, but when I did so, all of my raw meat spoiled. I didn't see this coming as there was no timer ticking down, so I thought spoiled meat just wasn't a thing yet. Clearly, I was wrong. On day 3, after a minor base expansion, I began working on a storage expansion, which failed rather quickly as I ran out of resources to make the chests. Speaking of resources, it was time to head to a thistle plant to collect thistles. You'll notice this is very different in this version, as you can just keep whacking it with an axe until you have as many as you need. I crafted myself a canteen and used it to collect water, as it was much harder to come by in this version, given that there was no infinite source inside of the oak lab. I finally made myself a roasting spit and smoothie station, as well as a trail marker to make it easier to get back to my base in the future. We needed an upgrade in tools, so I decided to take on a bombardier. As you can see, this was a lot harder in this version, as due to a lack of shield, the acid attacks cannot be blocked. This caused me to take a death that I could do nothing about. With this death taken, I decided to use the thistle needles I had gathered earlier to make some smoothies, as I was going to need heals in the future to survive these powerful enemies. While collecting flower petals, I was attacked and decided this would be a good time to fight a new enemy and learn how to kill things in this version. Blocking is entirely different in this version, as you can only block in between attacks, not mid-animation. After lasting a while, I was taken out and clearly needed more practice taking out enemies in this version of the game. Back for round 2, and this time I decided to employ the method of one attack and one parry. This worked much more effectively, and I was successfully able to take down my first orb weaver. Upon looting him, I got some spider silk, along with a chunk and some venom. Off to visit Rash now, as I needed to complete a trail marker in his hand in order to get some more raw science. Next, I headed to the ant nest and built a lure trap surrounded by spike traps, as this would attract and kill ants for some free parts. Or at least, that's what I thought. With this setup, I now had enough ant parts to make a full set of armor, which I proceeded to equip. I used this ant armor to allow me to carry more planks, thus reinforcing our base with walls. I tried to destroy a pallet to build some more, but it crashed my game.
Are you serious right now, bro?
Once back, I was able to finish my dew collectors, meaning I now had much more water at my base to keep me hydrated. Wolf spider time. One of the most dangerous enemies in this version of the game, but it had much less in terms of attack variety and was much more predictable. This meant I just had to block after each of my attacks, and the power of the Red Ant Club would easily be able to take down this beast, giving me my first spider fang. While in this area, I headed back to the Oak Lab to find Burgle was missing. Turns out bashing his skull in earlier wasn't a good idea, as he'd now disappeared. Anyways, off to the hedge now, where I decided I wanted to try the plug parkour. Turns out this was 100 times easier in this version, and I was able to get up here and grab the Cyber Strike Scabby scheme. Further into the hedge now, and I entered the field station and found some data and 3 granola bars, whilst also analysing the berry chunks. Even deeper, and I found the Flingman Flying Disc, which appeared to house some different enemies. I threw a rock at the wolf spider to confirm that this was indeed the hedge broodmother, an enemy that we weren't ready for yet, but it was on our to-do list. Once past the brood, I found a secret lab within which I discovered a strange note. This was the only ever note from the Watcher and was later removed as this storyline from the game was scrapped. Into the lab, and it seems that there is no chip here. When I headed deeper, I couldn't even get inside. That's right, this version is so early, we can't do any of the labs. But there is still this secret room with a scabby, but sadly no broodmother recipe. Dropping under the hedge, I found the creepy ant area where I was able to collect a bunch of ant parts as well as the rotten red ant club and 10 ant heads. It's worth noting that there wasn't even a red ant totem recipe in this version of the game. Ladybug on a mushroom. That's all. Now a dead ladybug on a mushroom, meaning I got my first parts, and I got a head on my first kill. Speaking of new stuff, it was time for another tier 2 weapon, the Spider Fang Dagger. I wanted to see how good it would be in this version. I also decided to make myself ladybug leggings and a helmet too to improve my defense. As you can see, the dagger used to act as an axe, so I was able to collect this hot dog, which was useful as I didn't yet have a proper tier 2 axe. I then tested it on a ladybug, and well, I think you can see how well it went. It was trash.
Stop it. Get some help.
Since I now had the resources, I was also able to make the tier 2 axe, meaning that dagger we had just made was now completely useless. I also had enough stuff to make the ladybug armor, which completed my set. Into the depths of the flooded zone, where I found myself a cave containing a scabby, before swimming deeper to find an opening containing the 4-leaf clover. This was really deep down, and didn't even register as a location in this version. And since there were no mutations, this was completely useless, and just served as a cool little Easter egg. Speaking of water, let's head into the pond for the first time. And it's empty. There's literally nothing here. So looks like we're going to leave and never come back. Into another pool of water by where the giant gnome now is, and there used to be this funny looking pipe that you could go in. Once inside, I found 500 raw science as well as another scabby, taking us one step closer to collecting them all. On day 10, I then decided to update the game. This moved it forward a couple of updates to 0.1.2. which fixed a bunch of bugs as I had lost Burgle and the red anthill couldn't be entered and it would crash my game every time I got close. As soon as I was in, I found the culprit. The lure trap I had set up had attracted hundreds of ants, causing a massive army to gather. I made the ladybug attempt to take them all down, which made for a fun viewing experience. While the ants were distracted, I headed into the red ant nest and grabbed the bee mask along with some quartzite. I then headed deeper to grab the rotten bee chestplate, meaning I had the full set. I also picked up the anthill Burgle chip, which was the last chip we could collect in this version. Back to the oak lab now, and Burgle had reappeared, meaning I could give him the anthill chip, which unlocked a bunch of new stuff in his shop, including fiber bandage efficiency, which I immediately purchased. I then used some more science to obtain the torch upgrade, as I wanted to craft every item in this version. 12 days in now, and I was able to chop some grass and create a floating stink bug. To nobody's surprise, this made it much easier to kill by throwing spears and allowed me to collect a stinkbug gas sack and some stinkbug parts. Using these parts, I made myself a gas mask, as this would be essential for taking down more stinkbugs and doing it quickly. With the mask equipped, I could now use my red ant club to wipe the floor with stinkbugs and easily get more parts. Speaking of wiping the floor with things, this bombardier tried to pin me down and covered me in his liquid. But luckily, I was able to escape and take him out, getting our very first boiling gland. With these items I collected, I could now make myself the insect hammer, our final tier 2 tool. The first place I headed after crafting this item was to the ice cap mint box. This tier 2 hammer allowed me to break the mints and collect some mint chunks. 20 to be precise. With my new axe, I was able to put 2 hits into a wolf spider before having to parry, but while fighting one, another showed up, and despite my best attempts, I died to a mysterious, magical force.
What the hell? Oh, brother, no.
Once home, I made myself the ultimate weapon, the original greatest weapon in Grounded, the Mint Mallet. Anyways, this base could use an expansion, so let's build a bounce web and get to work. And by work, I mean going into the Red Ant Hill and stealing all of their babies. This allowed me to analyze the egg, which was one of the final items I needed to analyze. I also headed into the haze with my gas mask to take out some funny looking infected weevils. This gave me another new item, fungal growth. I managed to find myself some infected mites too, which were quite literally just green mites in this version. I made my way to the Haze lab, only to find, just like the Hedge lab, it was completely locked and undeveloped, meaning I was unable to enter. In this version, you learn smoothie recipes by guessing, so time to try our first one, Green Machine. Turns out it's still the same recipe as always. Next up is Liquid Rage, and this recipe is also the same as before, still as expensive as ever. Next we have the Fuzz on the Rocks. This one is slightly different as it takes quartzite in this version instead of clay. Next up we have Gastro Goo, which has the exact same recipe as always, and is still just as useless. Next on the list we have Hedgelord, which is the same recipe but somehow blue in this version. And last but not least, we have Boost Juice, which completes our smoothie collection and puts me one step closer to finishing this OG playthrough. I was looking around the paint can for the Scabby when I eventually saw it. Somehow in this version, the Scabby was floating in the air. Now I also remember there being a burgle chip here, but I couldn't find it, so maybe this was added in a slightly later version of Grounded. Back home now, and I was making progress expanding the base as I needed more room for the collection of items needed to beat the game. Building this giant platform took a lot longer due to the massive lack of carry capacity in this version, but I was eventually able to get it done, and then began work on creating some armor stands to display all of the armor in the game. I came back with all of my armor and tried to organize it into different stands. I then added some weapon displays behind the armor stands and began filling them with all of the different weapons in the game too. Speaking of collections, my collection of items in my chests was getting too much. It was an absolute mess in my base. Time to organize. I began by moving all of the unique items into a chest near the armor displays, as I wanted to show off all of the torches, smoothies, and other cool items I had collected. I used the drying rack to make myself some jerky, as I really wanted one of everything. I then went to put some berry chunks on the rack to get some leather, but it turns out that this isn't possible in this version, so it looks like I have to manually craft it all myself. Anyways, my item collection chest is coming along nicely, and I have one of every type of arrow, along with my mint chunks and repair glue. My weapon and armor displays were also looking great, having almost everything collected and displayed at this point. But there was still one rather large problem. Burgle. I needed so much raw science to buy stuff from his shop, and I hadn't been able to do his quests because he literally went missing halfway through the playthrough, so it was time to get back on the raw science grind. I was, however, only 5 science away from the canteen upgrade. Oh my lord, look at all that juice. Another day, another quest marker for Burgle, paying me minimum wage as always. Now that that was done, I could finally afford the canteen upgrade, something which I had been needing for a long time. On day 20, I visited a field station that I had somehow never been to and collected a new piece of yard data, putting us one step closer to collecting it all. Speaking of collections, I also finally grabbed the Puncho Scabby flavor scheme, meaning we needed one less to complete our flavor assortment. With Scabbies on the mind, it was time to build up to the laser to grab yet another. This is one of the hardest to get to, and even breaking a ramp in this version seemed to destroy my entire staircase. But on attempt number 2, I was able to make it to the top and collect the Hyper Blaster Scabby scheme. On day 22, I had finally completed my collection of all gear in the game, including weapons and armor. I did have a full set of acorn armor on this stand, but it disappeared magically, and I couldn't be bothered to make another set. Back to the swap shop now to grab the eye patch upgrade, completing the armor collection. Next on the agenda was a complete collection of stuffed bugs and trophies, which should be easy as I've been killing plenty of them. This Bombardier Beetle is huge, but I was able to sneak him on the edge of the platform and complete yet another collection, putting us one step closer to finishing the game. 27 days deep now, and time to use these smoothies to help me. We're fighting the biggest enemy in the game, the Hedge Broodmother. I started by taking on a regular Orb Weaver as he was in the way. I then had to deal with the Hedge Broodmother, which proved way easier than I thought. I decided to practice some parrying to see her attack patterns, and as you can see, she has one close range attack that she does over and over again. Once I got some distance from her, she did do the wolf spider jump attack, except it stunned me, similar to the Termite King's attack. Now that we've seen all of her attacks, let's finish her off. Easy. Upon looting the body, it turned into an Orb Weaver, and gave me some horrendous loot. Back to the swap shop, and as you can see, there's 2 things left. But these burgle quests were taking too long, and I didn't need either of these purchases. I'm pretty sure I had all of the data, but it's impossible to say for certain, as I'm not completely clued up on this version of the game. Here's a final look at the base we built. As you can see, I tried to incorporate all of the furniture in this version of the game. Upstairs we go, and I had 4 water containers with all 4 liquid types: water, dirty water, juice, and soda. I had all armor and weapons, along with all the unique items like granola bars and mint shards. All that in 27 days and 15 hours. Hopefully this journey has shown you that since Grounded released 4 years ago almost, this game has come a long way and has a massive improvements, and it is almost night and day. It's practically a completely different game at this point. I really enjoyed going back and seeing the older versions of the game. It was very cool to see how different things are and how much the game has improved since then. That is the end of OG Grounded. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like on it, and I'll see you in the next Grounded video. Have a great rest of your day.